by Buen Mozu, €10. States have an interest to bring in large groups of people who vote for jibs. Private law communities would not. States want to expand mass immigration, plus the welfare state helps this. Sean and Altype, in a libertarian order, do you see the kind of problem that is brought by minorities voting affecting people negatively? Or do you think that getting rid of the democratic vote and being in a libertarian state where the state is essentially absent or very small solves the problem of minorities having different political preferences?
Real fast. Yeah, no, I'm collecting all the best super chats right now on
Okay.
Notepad. Just give me like 5 minutes. I have
All
a
right.
few good ones. I'm just going through all of them. There's a lot. So yeah.
Sean can answer.
Okay. So in a libertarian society, the political differences, I think, could be important in a few ways. So one is one we've sort of already been talking about, whereby a large number of non-white people move into an area and force their political preferences violently on another group. Another thing worth mentioning is that when different ethnic groups live near each other, human psychology tends to play out in a very predictable way. People naturally want to form large in-groups, and race is very visible. And so it's a very natural in-group to form. And when you have two competing groups next to each other, especially when they differ a lot in terms of their life outcomes, this naturally breeds a lot of antagonism. And those groups themselves very often turn violent. Ethnic conflict is ethnic diversity rather, is a very strong predictor of violent conflict within a society. And that often leads to, large violent institutions like states.
Do you share this view, Shine and that guy T? That ethnic conflict
not
could be caused in a
necessarily
libertarian state?
Not as a general principle. I mean, it's certainly been, a lot of the cases, in the past where there have been power structures that they've been fighting over. Somalia and the past little while has been a perfect example of it. Another good example is, after the Soviet Union fell, they had repressed all of these different conflicting groups like, Serbs and Croatians. But as soon as they went away, all of the conflicts started there. But that's because you had conflicts that were going back, centuries or maybe even thousands of years. I just don't think it's inevitable that when you get people of different cultures, they're going to fight it out. Otherwise, the whole California during the gold rush years would have been nothing but wars. And actually, it was relatively peaceful compared to what you'd expect from people in that situation.
Well, nothing in human behavior, well, at least most of the time in human behavior, you don't want to talk about inevitabilities, right? You want to talk about changes in the probability of outcomes. And ethnic diversity does increase the probability of those sorts of outcomes. And California, you look at California, right? And slowly over time, we have seen what political ethnic conflict looks like in a democratic context manifest in California.
But I think that's really because, if you look at the demographics of it, you've got basically that area up the coast between, basically between LA and San Fran there, which is basically where most of the population centers are. And they're also the most heavily leftist and most heavily socialist. You go to some other parts of California, and I mean, they're actually quite conservative or even libertarian in a lot of ways. And I think that's where you're getting the conflict there, because you've got a single state that's imposing all the things on people who, don't really fully agree with it. I think that's the source of the conflict there.
Well, but I think it's important to understand why regions in California vary in their political preferences, right? Because it's largely driven by the large Hispanic population that lives there. There was not this sort of problem in California earlier on and of course there have been some level of Hispanics in California always, but, and a lot of people maybe who aren't from California don't appreciate this, but the proportion of the population that is Hispanic in California increased dramatically over the 20th century. And earlier on, it was a much wider state, and you didn't have those sorts of problems. But I agree with you, actually, that when a geographical area, when a region changes, such that suddenly there's a big cluster of an ethnicity that's in one area, and they're voting to distribute resources from another group to them, then those two things should not be together, and they should form states that, well, they should form ethno-states, let's say.
But I just think it's interesting that, they move into California in those areas and they become leftist. But there are a whole lot of Latinos that live in my area, and for the most part, they're pretty heavily conservative. So again, I have to wonder how much of it is like the point I was making earlier about communists becoming plumbers. Are they just more of a reflection of what's going on around them, or are they selecting it, or are they actually influenced by it?
No,
I just don't think there's a cut and dried answer.
So I looked at this some, actually. I ran a series of analyses. It was a regression of lots of variables, but one of the variables is changes in the demographics of a state. If I remember right, the years were from 1970 to 2012, and a state increasing in its proportion of Hispanic, that is the population of the state becoming more Hispanic over time, predicts a shift whereby it starts to become more democratic. So no, it is not just them assimilating to the nearby culture. Empirically, they have an effect such that they make it more leftist.
Just want to say a wild Nick appears. Nick Fuentes. What's going on, buddy? How you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you guys doing?
Excellent, excellent. Do you have your knife ready?
I do actually. I got a bigger knife for
just
we're ready to go. But I won't use it. Hopefully I won't have to use it.
Nick is the inventor of knife violence in internet blood sports.
And also, if you're enjoying the stream, remember to hit like, and thank you for everyone who's donating. It's really hard to go through all these because it would just derail. But thank you very much for supporting the show. And yeah, what's up, Nick? You've been hearing the show for a while, or?
Yeah. I tuned in for about 5 or 10 minutes. I just wrapped up my show, and I've been kind of getting the gestalt of the libertarian, the demographic debate. Some pretty interesting stuff. I feel like everybody's kind of on the same page. Who are the sides here? What are the differences here?
Well,
I have no idea.
Yeah, I got into it with Shane about open borders for a while. That sparked something.
I think that we're actually like having a discussion. Like, I don't know if that's allowed.
Yeah, it didn't really go 2 versus 2. It ended up just being a discussion. Some heated moments, of course. Yeah, but from what you've gathered, what do you what's your take?
Yeah, so I've been hearing kind of this stuff about really the differences between like ethnic determinism and everything else. So I guess the gist of what I was just hearing earlier was the stuff about, well, the demographics aren't really determining these transformations and these differences. It's just other factors, we can't really attribute it to it. And I guess from the title, it's about this libertarian stuff, this open border stuff. And it's funny because I used to be a libertarian as well. I used to hold kind of these same views, but and something we were just talking about on my show earlier was that I think the fundamental presupposition about mankind and metaphysics that is made by people who believe in democracy, people who believe in open borders, is that people are interchangeable. I think that's the bedrock essentially of this proposition nation stuff, that America is a creed or an idea, is the idea that not only, like, does man integrate and assimilate, and, people can leave behind their prejudices and their tribal or geographic origins, but that it's possible that they can do that. And I don't think there's any proof that that's ever happened before, and especially not in this country. So that's really what made me change, was seeing that people are not, it's not like one race but the human race, we're all pink on the inside. There are very real differences between people that can't just be ameliorated by like public school education and propaganda. They are enduring differences, and I think you observe this in blacks as well. They've been here on this continent.
I think it's more sinister than that. I think it's become more sinister than that. I think what you're referring to is kind of an older idea of integrationism. But I think that's largely gone by the wayside, where you have these politicians who are saying, no, let's not make them integrate. Like, in fact, we need to integrate to them. They can have their Muslim ways. They can have their African ways. So I think that what you're talking about is sort of an older thing that isn't really, I'm sure there's a lot of people who still think that way, but I think that is receding.
Oh yeah, but particularly I'm talking about for libertarians, like specifically in response to like the Dennis Pragers, the Ben Shapiros, like these like classical libertarian people in particular, who say, because Sam Huntington, I don't have the book on me right now, it's in my bookshelf upstairs, but Sam Huntington talks about this, how America it started out defining itself ethnically, racially, culturally, and politically at the founding. And gradually all these identities receded until it's just a political identity now. We're no longer an ethnic definition of American no longer racial, and since the 1990s, no longer cultural. And I would say maybe the mainstream argument 20, 25 years ago was the assimilation, the integrationism you said that existed. But you're right. Now they say we don't even have anything to integrate into. It's just going to be a free-for-all. It's just going to be multi-ethnic, multiracial, multicultural. So, but I'm specifically talking about libertarians.
Yeah, one thing I think is a sort of a good thing to talk about with the United States is saying that this is a country that literally has no standards. I mean, that's a very simple way to say it, is that there's no racial standard. Heavens no. There's no political standard. You can believe whatever you want. American is freedom of political belief, freedom of religion. Like, if your idea of an American is based on all aspects of freedom, then what you're saying is we have no standards. Like, so
it's a democracy. Which I'm not saying that in a positive sense. It's just what it is.
I don't know. I mean, I think you could have a democracy and still have, some semblance of.
What do we mean by democracy? Like Switzerland? Yeah. Maybe, yeah.
I mean, was the United States in 1900 a democracy?
No. Republic. It's a republic, not a democracy.
Okay. Did you play word games here? Because republic is also known as a representative democracy, and I think is what most people.
But there is a crucial distinction between the two.
I know what you mean. There's a continuum, and I get what you're saying.
I just want to specify, me too, when I was talking about democracy earlier, people called me out on the chat. When I say the word democracy, I mean the ensemble of systems where people can vote, including republics. But that's how I mean it.
As like a mechanism as opposed to sovereignty, because we do have like democratic processes, but we do not have democratic sovereignty in the sense that the majority is sovereign over the country. That's why it is consequential, because, for example, the reason that we have a constitution, why that overrides us as a democracy, is because everybody has their own rights. And we individually delegate these responsibilities to the government. That's why they can act. So the reason that would differentiate us from a democracy, if a democracy said, we're going to take away, no more free speech today, no more gun rights today, and 51 or 50% plus one says so, that couldn't happen. And then that's the difference between a democracy. That would be the case. Here, the Constitution says, no, we protect the sovereignty of the individual, who they have certain rights. And that's why it's not like an abstraction. It is a real difference.
Well, I think you see that a lot in the conflict with leftists in the Electoral College, because, the Electoral College has its problems. I can talk all day about what we can do about that. But fundamentally, the issue, and when they say, we need to get rid of the Electoral College, well, of course they want to do that, because that means the president will be decided by California and New York, and Nebraska and places like that will hardly get a word in. The point of the Electoral College is to try and spread that out a bit, so that more people in different areas of the country where they do have different cultures and different viewpoints and different interests can actually, have a little more of a say, and not just be run over by a couple different areas of the country imposing their way on the rest of us.
Yeah, especially since we let millions of Hispanics into and then legalized them in California, which totally changed the way California voted, right? One thing I think worth mentioning briefly is that we were talking before about assimilation, and we were talking about how socioeconomic variables don't seem very predictive of immigrants moving away from this sort of ethnic politics where they just vote for the white people to distribute resources to them. And one variable that is predictive, though, of Hispanics not doing this is the tone of their skin. So that Hispanics who have lighter skin, which is a proxy for European genetic admixture, of course, are much more likely to vote Republican than darker skinned Hispanics are, which gets to the degree to which all this variation stuff is not only racial, but to some degree is intrinsically racial. And a lot of these problems that we're dealing with now, like this Electoral College thing, is the result of allowing America to become as multi-ethnic as we've let it.
Now, I'm asking this as an honest question, not an attack, but it sounds kind of like, are you really saying that like Europeans are kind of genetically more predisposed to smaller government? You are saying that?
Absolutely.
Well, I think
because if you look at Europe,
distinction. No, wait. I would make a distinction between white people in America and Europeans. White Americans, I think definitely yes. There's a weaker case for Europeans, obviously, because Europeans have quite large governments in some ways. In some ways they don't. That's a bit of a complicated question. But the people who immigrated to the United States was not a random sample. It was a hyper-individualist sample of a continent which already was the most individualist continent on Earth. And so I think, in fact, it would be hard to argue that there is no genetic predisposition among those whites who came to America early towards a libertarian set of values.
Right. Yeah. One thing I would point out is that there's also, I can also like point to like specific events that correspond very heavily with the overthrow of feudalism in the United Kingdom, in the Low Countries, what was called the North Sea area, and then sort of radiated out from there, right? There's actually like differential breeding that was going on where the upper class sort of filtered down and replaced the lower class about 2 times. Okay, there was like the most violent people were being killed off a lot. The homicide rate absolutely collapsed between 1100 and 1800. There were big genetic changes going on between 1100 and 1800 that basically forged, you know, what you could call the new European man or something. So it's so I can actually sort of pinpoint where you could call it the libertarian man, but certainly more libertarian thinking than had ever existed any time prior. And it came out of the North Sea area and radiated out to the rest of Europe and, of course, into North America. So it's a particular, it's a genotype. It's a germline that this libertarianism is highly dependent on.
I'm just trying to think about the genetic changes that will be required to make someone fundamentally think a different way. And I mean, it's sounding kind of huge to me.
It's not like that.
These are, it's important when you talk about political ideology, it's important to realize that political ideology springs from more base psychological factors, like someone's personality, like their intelligence, like their self-control, their level of risk aversion, all of these things. And these things, I think, seem more natural to talk about in terms of genes causing mean differences between people in them.
Right. Like, for example,
I want to explain the process here. It's self-selection and it's selection. When people leave a country like England and find themselves in a totally different continent, it's not everyone leaving England at the same rate. There are some people who have psychological predispositions to want to go on a boat and go on a totally different country that is just emerging. Just like Canada, there is a particular type of psychology that you need to be in the US, to be an English person in the US, to see the American Revolution and say, I want no part in this, I'm going north. I mean, I often say you essentially need to be retarded. And this is the history of Canada. It's people who left America because they saw a revolutionary war for independence and they didn't want any part of this. Through these selection actions, you don't select one gene, you select all the genes that are coding for a specific psychological predisposition. So these filtering events are what happens when humanity changes place, immigrates, or moves, or makes decisions like this in large groups of people doing all the same thing at the same time in history.
So let me put that together with some other stuff that you all have said and see if I get the picture. So if America is a place where you can only prosper by, you know, hard work and respecting freedom and stuff like that, then you're going to get that mindset there. But when you put in a welfare state, you're going to attract more of the, I don't know what, you know, word you would say, but I mean, the kind of people who would, you know, come in here to get the welfare benefits for whatever reason.
People with status predispositions.
Yeah, I don't know exactly.
So what? I'm just trying to get down. What is it just the welfare state, or is it other things that's attracting those with status predispositions?
It's the wealth. I think they would come to the United States even if there wasn't any welfare state. It's just they can earn higher wages for the same amount of work when they come from Mexico to the United States. And the thing is, you think, maybe I should think about the political differences between Mexico and the United States and not try to bring that with me. But why? Like they don't. Like the reality is that they don't change, they don't learn, and they don't care. Right?
You think of giving the opportunity?
I guess I don't understand.
Do you think? I guess I. 1 second, Sam. Do you guys think if given the same opportunity, they would migrate to Middle Eastern or white, or not white, but Asian states?
Well, Well, the United States is much wealthier than either Japan or China, but like, sure, they would if they had the
comparisons like European states.
Well, yeah, they do that from North Africa. They go from Sub-Saharan Africa to North Africa, from North Africa to, and also if you noticed in the migration from the Middle East to Europe, notice that they go from Syria, they go through Turkey, they go through many different Eastern European countries before they stop in Sweden or they stop in Germany. They stop in one of the wealthy, safe Northern European countries where they can get nicer stuff. They don't stop in Eastern Europe where they don't stop in like Albania. They don't stop in Serbia. They pull up and they stop in Sweden where they're going to.
I don't think it's only. I don't think it's only the wealth. I think it's also the I guess you call it the white altruism that are pretty predisposed to allowing certain demographics.
I agree. I'm just saying that getting rid of the welfare state wouldn't cause the problem. They would come in anyway, just because, like, if there's more money, they're going to be attracted to money. Period.
But I guess the thing I don't understand is you're talking about this genetic selection from when Europeans came over to America. Why, if you didn't have the welfare state and everything, why would that not apply to someone from Mexico or South America or wherever? Why wouldn't you get that same kind of selection?
Well, because
the average English guy who puts up on a boat 300 years ago is not equal to the average black person getting on a plane to Canada today.
Well, but also there's a big difference between settling and between coming to an established country. There's also a difference, like JF said, in the origin, where you have just a different kind of person leaving England, which is an individualist, it's a Protestant country, than from leaving Mexico, where they have patronage and they have statism. They have a one-party state for 100 years and collectivism. But also it's different. And this is something else that Samuel Huntington talks about between settling a country and going to an established country. When the settlers came here to Plymouth Rock, when they settled North America in the 17th and the 18th century, there wasn't a country that they could come to. And it wasn't just because, it's not about welfare. There wasn't even work that they could come to. There wasn't even like a stable or a wealthy economy that they could come to. They had to go and build a new country, which is very different than you roll up, you put in your application for a job, and there it is. You just become a part of the program. So it's a very big difference between, like JF said, getting on a boat and staking it all and building it. And you have to have war with Native Americans, and you have to build like a log cabin and chop down trees. Than if you go and you just become a part of the service economy and you take a check and you drive a nice car and you get your Obama phone and that kind of thing.
But I mean, certainly you would say that there are people of the individualist mindset in those countries. They're just not being attracted here the way they used to.
Oh, I would say that. I don't know if the more individualists or less individualists are more or less attracted to the U.S. It's just that those people, just as a whole population, are less predisposed to libertarianism. And I think it's for genetic reasons. And I don't think there's any reason to necessarily exclude genetic differences as an explanation for differences in at least biases or tendencies to political views.
But I mean, I'm just wondering if there's, some path forward for you to think, okay, here's a way we can change the incentive structure, not through legislation, border patrols, or anything like that, but just through economics and incentives, so that it would be more attractive to people of the more individualistic mindset and not quite so attractive to the people who'd want to come here and set up a socialist state.
But we don't want other people. That's the thing. Why is it decided already that we want to attract individuals, people from other countries? It's not just about economics. I mean, this is why the classes of immigrants and the waves of immigrants are different. But why is it a given that we want people to come here? I think we have a pretty nice thing going over here. And why should we want to invite people that don't speak our language, that there will be a process of assimilation, that are going to be different in manners and customs and ancestry and religion? I think we have to get rid of that idea altogether, that we have a pretty big population. We have a nice thing going over here. We have a prosperous, a strong economy. I don't think we need people to come over here. We have Americans that don't have jobs. We have Americans that don't have houses and don't own homes and don't, they're in debt. Why would we want to bring more people into this country? I don't understand.
Would you guys be in favor? And this is just something that's happening in real time. Everybody's familiar with like the attacks that are being waged against white South Africans, South Afrikaners. and also in conjunction with white South Afrikaners, also I guess European states. Would you be in favor in terms of the ethno state or the majority white civic nationalist state? I'm not exactly sure what your position on that is, Nick, but whichever. Would you guys be in favor of allowing those demographics to migrate to America, whether it's an ethno state or just a white majority civic nationalist, if those people are in strong favor of multiculturalism and are likely going to vote for laws or policies that would compromise your ability to maintain a white majority?
I would say that if they like the ideas of multiculturalism, if they like the idea of being ruled by other races, then they're exactly where they need to be in South Africa. But I don't think white South Africans think that way at all. So
Europe too.
Oh, Europe too?
Yeah.
Oh.
I would allow.
I don't know. One thing that's actually an interesting Well, are you stipulating that they would be multiculturalist?
I'm saying if they are, yeah.
Then if we had a way of knowing that they would be that way, I would say, you got your multiculturalist heaven. Just
like if you had like voting records of them, and you could tell.
Yeah, I would say no. You get to stay out. That's what I would say.
Yeah, I agree. The thing is, I don't want people that aren't going to assimilate from Europe. I in the same way that I don't want mass immigration from Mexico or from Africa. I would want mass immigration. I wouldn't want to put down 40 million Russians in the United States. And just because if they're not going to assimilate, I think Russians would have a better chance of assimilating because they have a Christian tradition and they shared some history with Europeans and some traditions, obviously a different civilization. Spengler classified them as separate, but they'd have a better chance. But either way, I would still say if they're not going to contribute to the culture, I don't see why we should have any immigrants, European, African, South American. I think we have enough people as it is.
All right. So, Andy, it looks like we could add for concluding statements if you're ready. All right. So you can share your thoughts on everything we've discussed. We generally don't respond to others' concluding statement, but we tell a general view of everything that we've learned today or that we have as a position as a result, starting with Sean last.
Okay. This sort of went all over the place, but I guess my concluding statement would be that ethnic groups differ in variables that influence how they vote politically, and that moreover, ethnic diversity inherently influences how people vote because they form groups based on those ethnic groups and then engage in democratic warfare with each other. It's not clear that an anarcho-capitalist society could solve these problems, but I have nothing against a large group of people going to an area and trying an anarcho-capitalist society. I would not vote to stop them from doing so. That's about it.
All right. And now that guy, T.
I would just say my conclusions are pretty much what I had already came in here with, in that I guess I came in hoping to establish the idea that the alt-right ethno-state as a concept and anarcho-capitalism or libertarianism aren't mutually in conflict or aren't inherently in conflict, and that there is a lot of similarity and a lot of common ground in terms of principle that we can find amongst these different groups. And also, I think today we've established that there is a discussion to be had there, and that also, I just really like the idea of contemplating things outside of the status quo. You can argue that all these grandiose envisions of an ethno state or in Kapistan or whatever are utopian. They'll never happen in our lifetime. Blah blah blah. But I think it's still interesting, fun, and useful for discourse in terms of discussing these ideas. And not just sticking primarily to the framework of how do we fix liberal democracy.
All right, Ryan.
Yeah, I would say like the idea that these sort of radical ideas are utopian or useless to talk about, I think that stems from looking at it as sort of an all or nothing issue. Like if you have, say, a white activist movement that's going on, say they don't manage to form the ethno-state out of the United States, you still if you're gaining ground and you're gaining, people who listen to you and gaining people who think that way, gaining people who vote that way, you can have all sorts of influence doing all sorts of good things up to that ultimate goal, ultimate pie in the sky sort of thing. And on top of that, I would say that the pie in the sky idea of radical movements is based on any one radical movement trying to succeed on its own. If there can be some sort of, united front, again, we have about 30% of people in the United States wanting their state to break off from the United States in California and Texas. So it's not exactly that far out of there. And so I don't think that you should eschew radical politics, because radical politics, it doesn't prevent you from engaging in traditional politics. And it's not as big of a pipe dream as it might think if you look at it in a different way.
All right, now Shane and then Nick.
All right. Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me on. Just instead of trying to reiterate a lot of what I've talked about here, because we kind of went all over the place, I will just kind of get, what I think is, a sense of what I see, which is what I see a lot of other places. We have people here who are seeing a lot of problems in America and elsewhere in the world. The problems are real. I'm not denying that. But they've got some kind of idea in their head of how to fix it. I think they're wrong about that. But, even if they're correct, I would ask everyone to consider that you might have the perfect way of solving whatever solution to whatever problem you see. But if you want that solution to be done by the iron fist of government through some, political policy, which is always done by force, then you have to consider the fact that you're not going to be the one making that decision. It's going to be someone else. And even if they could do it exactly the way you want, it probably wouldn't stay that way for long. They would have different ways of looking at things than you. And that would even be true if you had the ethno state. You wouldn't be a bunch of clones. I'm sure we'd all agree. You'd all have your own differences of opinions on something. But when you hand off that power to someone else, you kind of lose control. And that's the problem I see, because we've really lost control of things. We've got a $20 trillion debt. We've got, all sorts of problems with government getting involved in the economy and trying to take care of people from cradle to grave. And I don't really see the solution as handing even more power to the government that isn't doing what we want to begin with. And I think that's my moral from all of this.
All right,
boy, a lot of libertarian stuff. It's so hard, but hey, thanks for having me on, JF. Thanks, Andy. It was a brief one that I came on here. Not a lot of blood. Where's the blood? I need blood.
Oh,
next
you missed
time.
the blood.
I came hungry. The knife came with some blood, but we got some. It was some blood, but no. I guess my concluding statement would be that the people are different. People are different. The differences between races, ethnicities, genders, all the rest, they're not arbitrary. It's not this, we're all pink on the inside. There are real differences. And I think we in the free world, we in the West have to account for that. There has to be a confrontation with this reality, because we've been taught to unlearn these things. We've been taught the antithesis of these things. And in denying that reality, I think we've really found ourselves in a heap of trouble, demographically and otherwise. Ideally, I would say we should have no immigrants, but I prefer assimilable immigrants over others. And I think the only people that would stand a chance at assimilating are white people from Europe and from other places. But that said, I think we got enough people as it is. We want to make America great with the people here. All type. I noticed a lot less confrontational on the stream, but that's okay. I guess a little bit more Pacific today, a little bit more peaceful, but as always, a fun time, a short one, but thanks for having me on.
All right, thanks to all of you. This was an awesome debate, Andy, right?
It was fantastic. I got a little bit heated at one point.
You had to take a break.
Yeah, but no, it was excellent. So everyone, thank you for being here. That was